Okay, right. That should be working now. So hopefully we're going to be recording this session, seeing whether it comes out okay so that we can like publish it in the future. So welcome everyone. I am sending a broadcast now, so we should get an influx of people joining hopefully.
Remember, you were all the lot who came pre-broadcast. You were the cool. You were the cool 300.
They are the real ones. Just checking that works before we send it out to a bunch of players. Yep, that should work. Okay, so the broadcast should send people directly into this server now. Hopefully that's in-game. If anyone's in-game, please verify that you got it in-game. We're gonna get potentially an influx of people. Awesome. Cool. So we'll wait like maybe a minute, because the people that join as new members aren't gonna have permissions until about a minute's passed so that they can join in. So they'll like trickle in while we're talking, and then hopefully we can get started. Okay. Right.
Can you hear me?
Elena, can you hear us now? Yeah, we can. Awesome. Just in time. Okay, so right. I have a problem. So I was
there we go.
I was able to share my screen when the stages call was small, and now it's like a larger call. It's not letting me. I did not know that. So yeah, I do have the presentation in front of me, but I unfortunately can't present it unless anybody knows a workaround.
We could boot up a new channel and post it slide by slide if you want to.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I guess that could work. Let me set that up. So it's going to be a text channel, slides, create channel. Nobody talk in there, please, I'm begging.
Speedrun.
Right, members cannot send messages. Everyone cannot send messages. General contributors cannot send messages. Hopefully you can read that channel though. Let's see. Can everyone here see the? Can the members see the slide? Okay, cool. So we.
Yeah.
All right, this is going to be a very janky presentation. I really apologize, but this is how we're going to do it, guys. So yeah.
Discord admin live.
Okay. Great. So how did you guys find this sort of this survey? Pretty much, we had 17,000 responses. Wait, I'll just post the top level summary actually. So this is the day 1/7 summary. So this is basically what I presented to the dev team following your feedback. This is the overall summary, if you guys can see it. So 17,000 responses to the refinement survey. 52% of respondents did say that sailing wasn't their first choice skill, but that means that about 48% of people did say sailing was their first choice. Community sentiment, we have a way of measuring it, and it was considered positive. We had less interactions on the blog, so we have a way of measuring how many interactions were recorded over the course of the first few days. There were less interactions, obviously, because we didn't promote it like a big video. Shamanism and sailing were obviously very, very close, and this was noticeable when we saw that players were still talking about the two. But we know that players are hopeful about sailing. There's lots of potential there, and we see that sailing can be improved. There's a lot of like key areas that we can focus on in order to kind of make sure that we manage sentiment in that area. But the one key thing that we sort of took away from this whole stage at the moment is that you guys want more detail. You want a lot more detail on the specifics around sailing, the micro level detail that you've been talking about in Discord. So yeah, what do you guys think? Do you have anything to add on that as far as just the summary of how refinement's gone so far?
I mean, don't have too much to add. Just want to like thank everyone for responding. I know it's a bit more, can I say dry, I guess, compared to the previous survey, but it still is super useful to us, and this is actively helping shape the skill. So thanks to everyone who responded.
Absolutely agree. Husky,
What she said.
Kieran, Cuss, any thoughts?
Nothing on top of that, to be honest, for this bit.
Cool. All right. We'll dive into the next bit then. So looking into it a bit closer, we wanted to obviously understand what kinds of respondents were taking part in the survey. This is very top level, so it doesn't go into like too much detail. But if you are curious, these were a breakdown of the kind of skill total levels, a breakdown of whether they played Iron accounts actively, and what kinds of activities you guys got up to. So none of this was particularly surprising, at least to myself. You have the biggest category of players are sort of over 1,800 skill total. And that seems to be like one of the biggest kind of cohorts that we're looking at getting feedback from. So yeah, I wouldn't say that any of this is particularly surprising. When we discussed it as a team, we did find that the types of people engaging in these surveys are our like core audience, the people who are more dedicated, the types of people that show up to Discord stages calls like these, who are just interested in the game and want to understand a bit more about behind the scenes stuff. So yeah, if you're curious, that was the turnout for the types of respondents that took part in the survey, which are informing our decisions based on refinement. I'm just checking out the chat now. Did you guys want to add anything?
I think something we noticed here is that like a lot of people who responded in this one are quite high total level compared to the previous one, at least. Or is it like quick maths here? What, 70%? I think are 1,800 total or higher, which is quite high, right?
So if the Iron Man breakdown, that's a lot of Iron Men compared to how many Iron Men are actually active in the game. So somebody asked, Bunsen Gyro. Well, that's a huge proportion of Iron players. Do you have a rough idea of how many players play Irons in general? Like, off the top of my head, it's more like anywhere between 10 and 20% on an average player logged into the game. So it is overrepresented, and it makes sense, right? The more dedicated you are as a player, probably the more likely you are to answer a survey. So, and Iron players probably are the more invested players. You've probably already played a main, so on, a lot of the time. So we've got to take that into account when we obviously we keep that in mind when we're looking through this information.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we'll probably see at a later point as well, is that like these stats aren't necessarily indicative of how the total player base feels. It's more indicative of what the higher level community feels, in general.
Absolutely agree. I think a lot of people don't realize how high level they are in comparison to the rest of the community. They probably don't see themselves as like that high level type of player, but in comparison to like, hundreds of thousands of people, they probably are. If they're engaging with us on surveys and things like that, they probably spend a significant amount of time and energy into the game, which naturally makes them a bit more knowledgeable and more invested. Are you calling us nerds? No, never. Right, we can move on to the next slide if we want to. Talking a bit more about the detail of the core system and gameplay loops. We had a lot of discussions in this area, so get ready. Again, none of these are surprising, I think. So let us know if there's any surprising stats here. But here you can see when we asked about the type of training methods to train sailing, what would you prefer? Would you prefer a skill that has one main type of training method but with variations? Or would you prefer a variation of completely separate and unique methods? They are both pretty well liked, but you can see there's a clear kind of distinct amount of more strongly likes for the variation of completely separate and unique methods. And we had a big discussion about Hunter as a skill, so I don't know if we want to talk about that now.
It's an interesting one because I think
You-
out of the existing skills, so a lot of the feedback we got initially on sailing was that no, sailing is a minigame, which I disagree. I don't think it is. But looking at the existing skills and looking at, okay, which one seemed the most like a minigame? Slayer does actually seem the most like a minigame, at least to me, because you keep going to the Slayer Master, you get a task, and then whatever task it is the variety, but you always go to Slayer Master. And that kind of overarching system feels a bit like a minigame to me. And so I'm glad that people kind of seem to not want that, because I think that will just drive sailing to feel more as, well, a wide skill rather than reinforce people's beliefs that it's a minigame.
Absolutely.
I also think that, like, the way these are presented to players, do you want one training method or a variety, almost leans itself into, do you want more content or less content, which players might just go, we want more content, right? Want you to do more. So, but I think that also makes sense with it being a skill. A skill probably should have a large variety of content to do. Maybe not necessarily a large variety of training content, but, you know, regardless. The question, players will tend to tell us they want more,
Breaking
right?
up a little for me.
Breaking up quite a lot for me, to be fair.
Oh, sorry, was my mic?
Yeah,
was
you're
it
breaking
screwed
up a
better?
bit.
Sounds like
Are
that.
you on the VPN by any chance?
No. Can you hear me better now, or?
So far, so
Yeah,
good.
should-
Cool. All I was going to say is
So
that the
you were
question
talking
can
about
kind
the
of.
fact that this survey kind of leans into this trend that you're seeing where players will naturally lean towards more content, so different methods being preferable because there's more content, right?
Yeah, that's the gist of what I was saying there, right? Where players, even though like more training methods can mean less other content, I think that the question will present itself
Yeah,
in a way where
Husky,
players will
you're
go, yeah, I want
breaking up a
more.
little bit more still.
Did you
I'm not sure if it's worth like leaving and rejoining, maybe?
did you disconnect from the VPN, Husky?
Husky. We'll DM him on
He's on his own computer.
Slack.
Okay. Sounds like it's an internet thing.
Freaking internet, man.
Maybe we should move on,
Um,
and he can jump back in later.
Hashtag British internet.
Feels bad, man. But yeah, so obviously this is just very top level information that we're giving to you guys in terms of how you guys feel about different things. But Husky touched on a really good point where we do see this trend throughout the whole of the survey that obviously when you ask players, would you like more content or less content, they will always pick the option that seems like it has more content, more things to do, which is very, very natural, very understandable. I'm not sure, do we want to allow people to ask questions throughout and like request to speak potentially? Just get like one question per slide, or do you want to chance it and see?
Chance it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, let's chance.
There was one point I wanted to touch on briefly.
Alright.
With the you mentioned at the start of this point there was a comparison to the hunter skill and what we looked at. Like the hunter skill is so bloated with so many training methods that are just, on a serious note, kind of dead content. Like they each have their uses, but as a training method, you'd never do it. I kind of want sailing to have a chunk of training methods that are just like none of them are dead content. That's what I would like to get.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Like, some of them might be like smaller pieces of content, but ultimately they should have at least some use, even if that might be a really niche thing.
Yeah, Hunter's just. I think Hunter's biggest problem is it's, a lot of these things are just either not rewarding or misbalanced. Like, they don't serve good XP, and what do you get? A bunch of furs you don't. It's. So why would you ever do it? It just doesn't make sense. I think the best skills are the ones that have variety, and I believe that's, you know, something I care about wanting us to do across existing skills as well, is make sure they do offer a variety of options. Which means if you want a slightly more AFK option or a slightly more intensive option, you've got your pick. If you want something that's more rewarding XP wise and less on and costs you money, you've got that option. If you want something that makes you money, you maybe got that option. Like, I think that's a good thing. Mining still needs work, but it's like you've got a lot of choices, right? You can go to Motherlode, you can go to Granite, you can go to Volcanic, you can go blast mining even. Like, there's quite a lot of options. I do think it's nice that skills can offer that, which means you get to pick which one's right for you. So I'm keen to whatever new skill, whatever we do with sailing, that there is some of that. I think it'd be pretty boring if it's just one linear method, 1 to 99.
Awesome. Yeah. Do we want to chance it by letting someone ask a question? I'm not sure. I've seen some shenanigans going on in the chat already, but we'll see. Raise your hand now if you have a question specifically around core system and gameplay loops in regards to the type of training method that you imagine for sailing.
And same rules apply on call as well as in chat, right? Just don't be an idiot.
Don't be rude.
Yeah.
All right. Let's ask. I can see Rykar here. I hope this is gonna be okay because I remember we tested the permissions. He seems like a chill dude. We'll see. Right. I've invited. Hello, Rykar. You're muted. Great start.
You're muted on Discord, so you might need to press that button.
Press the button. Aw. Okay. Well, I will move them to the audience until we can figure out. Oh, wait. No.
They muted there.
I moved them to the audience. Okay, we'll try again. Another person. I am God. Let's see. Do you have a question for us? Hello.
Hi guys.
Hello.
What is your question for the team on core gameplay loops?
So, with hardcore Ironman specifically, and sailing, you're at sea, so there should be some level of danger. Are there any plans to make any parts of any of the gameplay loops hardcore not safe? Like you can actually die doing some of the things.
Good question. I don't think we're quite at that level of design yet.
Okay.
But would be curious to hear what the devs initially think. Like, what are your initial thoughts?
I mean, I have some
Just
initial thoughts.
My instinct says yes. Like, I think the sea is probably a rather dangerous place, at least in some areas, right? And if we're going to have some sort of ship combat, then I would expect some of that to potentially be dangerous. The other aspect of that is the islands that you could possibly get to. If there is an element of danger on those islands, I would expect that to be dangerous for hardcores as well. Say that an island has a boss on it, for example, then that'd probably be dangerous.
And just a little bit of separate question. Since hardcore groups get it a lot harder on the death penalty, would you do anything specific for them to be even extra unsafe? Because hardcore groups can lose it literally anywhere.
It's really hard to say at this point because we've not, fleshed out the gameplay loops at all yet. So, yeah, it would be hard to visualize at this point. Although, I guess we'd try to keep it as similar as possible. I don't think we'd make something custom for hardcore group Ironman. It's just my initial feeling, but.
Cool. Thank you so much
Hey,
for that.
hopefully you guys can
Thank you.
Great questions. Do want to highlight as well, with this whole new polling process, basically everything is step by step. So that to me seems like something that we'd look at sort of very much later down the line.
later.
Yeah, once we've nailed down this is what at a micro level you're doing, here's how you're sailing, you're going to a port, you're then going to see all of that stuff, fleshing that out. I think that's the the stuff that we then look at afterwards. But it's really good that, you know, we can get thoughts out now, and bring you in along the process, right? Like that's the whole point of the new polling approach, is like to bring you in, to give that feedback early on so we can keep that in mind. So thank you so much, I Am God. I'll move you now to the audience and we'll continue on with the others.
Can I
Just
be that
one
guy
thing
for a
on
second
that.
to make
Oh.
my point that I was going to say, just quickly, because I had a thought about it as well.
Yeah,
So like in terms of like the hardcore safe death stuff, in my sort of way, I would probably want to do it. It's if your ship was to get destroyed whilst you're just doing regular sailing, then you would like probably ideally wash up somewhere but wouldn't die. So it probably wouldn't count as like a death to a hardcore. But if you were partaking in any sea activity and you died during that, then it would count as a death. But if it was just sailing and your boat was destroyed, probably, then I would personally vote to not kill hardcores.
Interesting.
I think also it's worth noting that, like, I don't think everything in the skill will be combat related, you know? It's a skill that, much like, I don't know, much like Hunter, in the sense that some of it might be around dangerous things, but it's not a combat skill, per se, so there should absolutely be safer methods to train as well.
Awesome, fab responses, guys. So the next slide, we're talking about low intensity activities. We basically surveyed players based on initial impressions of these 4 different activities. We had courier missions between ports, fishing expeditions at sea, slayer tasks on islands, and exploring and charting reefs. The most popular activities were exploring and charting reefs and fishing expeditions, although all of them seem relatively popular. There's none that's like super unpopular. But we had a whole discussion around why potentially courier missions between ports might have been the least liked idea out of all of them. So do we want to discuss that now and see what the dev team think?
Sure. Before I begin, Husky, are you back? Like, are things working for you? Hello.
Hello?
Hey,
Is it better now?
Yeah.
I think it might have been just like a sensitivity issue or something where like I might be not talking very loudly and it's cutting out, but hopefully that
Yeah,
came
you sound
across clear.
now.
Cool. Push to talk for the win.
Yeah, Husky, really curious to hear your thoughts about why potentially courier missions between ports wasn't as popular of a low intensity idea with players.
I think really it comes down to like it's the one that sounds the most minigamey, right? Like task assignment based as opposed to doing actual content. And that's a vibe that we've seen a lot where players tend to be against that kind of idea of sailing. Like minigame is very much a buzzword in terms of like anything that sounds minigamey, and sailing is bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would explain it, but generally speaking, there isn't negative support for it, right?
Yeah, I agree. Definitely, I've seen the association to any mini game with sailing as a negative thing amongst the player base. Like, this is something we definitely need to tackle and try and change people's minds about. But in terms of like low intensity activities, I love the idea of exploring and charting different reefs and having fishing expeditions at sea. Slayer tasks on islands, we also mentioned that could be considered more of a reward space than potentially a low intensity activity. So yeah, lots of different options for you guys to go with, and hopefully we'll be able to share more about that like micro level detail that players are looking for when it comes to how they can imagine training the skill. It's super important that we do provide people with different levels of intensity, so it's not just like a really highly engaged skill throughout the whole of training it. You do have downtime, you do have times where you can just sort of AFK train it and stuff. Do you guys have any thoughts about that? Do the players here have any suggestions on what they want to see?
Someone said that they would like to, or asked if it would be possible to add hired charter vendors that have rotating stocks that you could barter items, so sell a whip to them for a lot of resources.
Ooh, what do you think about that?
generally, I think it sounds interesting. We've talked about what we can do with different people and factions, I guess, like around the sea. So traders, for example, like how could you interact with them? Would there be, a system to kind of progress? Like, could you be a trader? That sort of thing. It's an interesting thought that we haven't had the time to explore too much yet. One thing that I quite liked is what if you could kind of progress through the ranks, but in different factions? So you could be a trader, but then you could, become a merchant, and then you could rise in the hierarchy within the trader company. But then you could also do it with others. Like you could, instead of fighting pirates, maybe you could become a pirate, and then you could raise within that hierarchy as well. So just different meta progression systems.
Absolutely love that. Husky, Cuz, Kieran, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it leans into the whole people
Nope.
already are thinking 3 steps ahead in terms of where they judge sailing. It's really easy to come up with specific sailing activities.
I'll
Damn it.
just
That's
say
pretty much what I was going to say, though.
yeah.
What a level of detail that we're just right now. Obviously, we're kind of using these thematic options. Gosh, what are the different kinds of thing you could do with sailing? Obviously, as we move forward, we'd flesh these out more fully. But this is helping us to decide which ones do you really care about, which ones sound cool from the get-go, and we'll focus on those ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely. This is dream world where if we, take away for a second that we're doing it under this new polling approach, what kind of questions would you ask the devs, and what kinds of potential suggestions could you get in? But at this early stage, the sky is the limit at this point. We don't know what's possible. The reality is we have to prioritize the features depending on what players want the most. So in terms of the types of low intensity activities, we've kind of given you a temperature reading survey to see what you like, what you dislike, and then we'll take those ideas further and flesh them out a bit more. The truth is, in my opinion, you could make anything really good. It just depends on how much time and how much feedback changes you go through. But I really love the idea of utilizing player suggestions a bit more and getting a bit more potentially even someone mentioned that could be a really good item sync, and I could totally see it working in the game. So
I think there's something to be said about explanation versus execution on this as well. So you can explain something without it sounding too exciting, but then when you actually get to showing what it looks like in game, it might feel very differently. So I could say to you, I want to go into a pyramid and fight bosses. Okay, sounds cool. But then I show you Tombs of a Mascot, and suddenly it's whoa, okay, that is sick. Or I could say, you have to venture through the swamp and defeat enemies along the way, and then you get some rewards at the end. And you're okay, sounds a bit similar to the previous thing. But then you get temple trekking. So it's the way you explain things doesn't always correlate to the excitement of the execution of it, if that makes sense. So ultimately, my point on that...
That just comes down to
yeah,
content,
exactly.
right?
So ultimately, my point on that is that even though courier missions might sound boring, we could still make some pretty cool gameplay out of it, I believe.
Me too.
Yeah, I don't think anything is off the table from this survey. We did kind of want players to go and basically say nope, we hate this idea, do not pursue it, so that we had a clear understanding of what players want. But again, I don't think anything was too spicy to the point that things were taken off the table and completely ruled out for consideration. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity for the devs to take ideas from the community and their own expertise and come up with some really cool ideas for you guys. Should we move on to high intensity activities?
Let's do it.
Let's go. We do have to speed through because I've just realized the time. So, High intensity pretty much looks like, if it sends, my internet is super slow. Processing, great. So high intensity, you had a lot of love for sea bosses. You had a lot of love for conquering islands, which is very, very understandable. There was a little bit less than we thought support for navigating challenging sea terrain. Do you guys want to discuss that? Because we did have a really interesting discussion about this. It's a big part of what we felt sailing could be.
My first thoughts on it is it's because there's a lack of confidence in how ship movement and so on will work. And that's part of it. The second part is it's like, does that end up interesting? Is that like sepulchre at sea? Is that like agility laps? Like, what is it? One of those maybe sounds more interesting than the other, but it also is contingent on ship movement being good and not annoying. So maybe that's part of it. That's at least my thoughts.
Definitely keen to hear more from Husky if your internet allows.
Hello?
You're going
Am I
green,
allowed
but I
to
can't
talk?
hear you.
I'm calling it now. His issues are gonna be fixed like 2 minutes till 5. Then he's gonna have to rap God everything that he wanted to say during.
Oh,
You
man.
can't hear me at all?
I wish all my issues were fixed by that time. I'd be a very...
Husky, do you want to try joining like on your mobile phone or something? Just as another option. Might not sound amazing, but could work.
In the meantime, do you want to risk another player question? If any players have a question about high-intensity activities, raise your hand. I feel like a teacher right now. Raise your hand.
I think the other thing I'd add to this slide is like, we're not 100% sure which of these are like, some of these could be like rewarding activities, some of these could be training activities. I think there's a big difference between like defeating a sea boss. Is that a training activity or is that something you can do, say, like once you've got 45 sailing and you unlock this new area? Like, we don't know, I guess, but something like discovering and conquering new islands sounds like it could be a training method. Navigating challenging sea terrain sounds like it could be a training method.
We've got skill specs, apparently. I don't know if this is the real... Is this the real skill specs?
Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Oh.
Real skill split.
Hey!
is.
How are you
Yeah,
guys?
good, how are you?
Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, not bad. No, just a genuine question. Do you plan to do anything beyond the wilderness with sailing? You know what I mean? Like, beyond.
So, do
Like
you mean
PvP
Beyond the
at sea.
wilderness.
PvP?
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, PvP, you know? That's what I don't know. In my head, I've envisioned it like, I don't know, just sailing beyond Mage Bank, you know?
can have
You know,
I don't know,
I'm
like,
so shocked that I'm so
I don't
shocked
know.
that you would ask about PvP. That's like, wow.
Couldn't believe it. He's not
Hey,
talking about high... Well, is PvP a high-intensity task?
Could be.
It could be, I guess.
I think most of the time it is.
Okay, so if that's not the question you're looking
No,
for,
it's a
No,
good
it's
question.
plan to do any PvP with sailing, you know? That's a second question. Any
So
PvP with
we've
sailing.
talked about it a bit. Oh, hello, Husky.
Mobile phone tech, maybe.
Husky bro, what's going on, man?
Absolutely
so
stealing the
scuffed,
question.
I love it. Husky, do you want to answer the question about PvP?
He probably didn't even hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to do some form of PvP sailing if we can. It always comes down to like, do players want this kind of content in the game? And that'll go with anything, whether
Yes.
we're adding skilling content or bossing content and stuff. But the idea that there is a sea that is lawless, you're so far out that rules don't apply, regulations don't apply, is so thematically fitting the idea of like, it really leans into like piracy vibes and stuff. So I'm sold on that stuff being awesome, but I couldn't say like exactly how that would work, right? Is it its own unique system for PvP, or is it, you know, taking elements of PvP players already know? Hard to say. But yeah. I'm not opposed to it.
You
It's
got
not
so
something I
many
could-
options, you
Like,
know?
what do you think, Jay? Like,
You know.
would you do it as like where does it compare to like Bounty Hunter or Last Man Standing? Like, where does it fit in? What are you imagining in your head? Like pirates, one team on one boat, one team on the other, and you try to steal each other's boat or what? Like, I don't know.
Oh, imagine that, like firing cannons at each other and stuff. Like you have to fuel the stuff to fire at the other people. I don't know. Like it comes back to the question, like what you were saying a minute ago, with how clunky it's gonna. I don't know what the navigation's gonna be like. You know, it's like in my head, I don't know what it's gonna be. It's so hard to envision right now.
So
you know, I have to know what the pattern's like.
Talking about that, we've actually, I don't know if it's okay to say this, but we've decided to switch around the dates that we're talking about navigation and core gameplay. So we'll actually be starting with navigation, hopefully first, because we know that it is such a big deal. It's what basically dictates the rest of the skill. So instead of talking about core gameplay as our first topic, we're going to be going into navigation as the first topic. That's the plan anyway. It could change, but that's what we decided to do based on community feedback.
Yeah, 100%.
No, it would be a picture when you've got that,
Cool.
vision. I don't know. Thank you for the answering my question.
Thank you.
Yeah,
for
thanks for joining. I think a big thing as well.
Thanks.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I think a big thing as well is that if we do some sort of PvP activity, it would have to be an optional thing because not everyone wants to engage in PvP. That's
What do you mean? Everybody likes dying. Come on now. Please.
Yeah, we don't want it to
No,
cause
I know what you're saying.
more
I know what you're saying.
divisive conversations, because this topic as well is just a divisive topic. Like, people are going to have their favorites, people have their opinions. We don't want to divide people even more. But I think we definitely see the benefits of exploring that area as long as people want us to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of our skill pillars is that it works for a variety of player types, right? Or something along those lines. I don't remember the exact wording, but to me that means we should think about, okay, PvPers, what do they get out of this, or skillers or PVMers.
Awesome.
Hey, you've got me firing a cannon and I'm in another player. Yep. I've written you.
Don't worry, Jay.
Easy.
Thanks.
That sounds
We've already got some ideas
fantastic.
for boat PvP. So
Okay.
Oh.
He's
Okay.
gonna
I'm
soundbite
excited.
that. Oh, god damn. Alright, I'm moving him to the audience back.
All right.
we'll end with that. And leave him, yeah.
Alright,
One
that
thing
is
it
gonna
does
be on
open up as
YouTube.
well.
That's fine.
One thing a PvP at sea does open up, like just the idea of like you're on a boat. Is that to the level of like you're swinging across to an enemy person's boat with a grappling hook to 3-tick them with, or 2-tick them, swap them with ancients, 8-way switching, or is it's entirely different system, right? Like, I don't know the answer to that, but it does raise an option for like perhaps a very different feel of PvP than what currently exists in the game for players who who might not be into that. I don't think that. I think the players who go, oh no, PvP, that's such a waste, but like. For example, if PvP in Old School RuneScape isn't someone's cup of tea, maybe PvP at sea has a different feel. Or maybe there's a combination of both. I don't know. It's so way late down the let's get into the nitty-gritties of that specific content idea. But I do think that I guess my point is that it highlights that there could be other ways of handling it that players are perhaps not considering when they hear that idea. The idea that you're loading cannons and shooting it and someone's aiming it is a very different feel than
Definitely.
using special attack orbs and killing people really quickly.
Cool. We have a small amount of time, so I'll skip some slides. Looking at scope, this is the next slide. So essentially it was talking about, we had this question in our minds. We were like, when we look at sailing as a skill, it is a monster of a skill. It's a huge skill. We were, obviously understandably nervous around the scope because it touches so many areas of the game. And I think that was part of the appeal of the skill. So we asked you guys, when looking at content, should we ensure that the entire sea is filled with like content, but it's sort of light content? Or should we focus our resources more on making sure that specific sections of the sea release with like dense content? Obviously the ideal is the entire sea has dense content, but if we had to focus resources and prioritize things, we wanted to know what the preferred option was. And it came out to be that dense content in specific areas of the sea is more preferable than trying to make the entire of the sea filled with some kind of content. I'm not sure how the chat feels about this, but we did have a discussion about how players feel about this, like content releases in general, and the continent of Zaya came up in that discussion. So I'm not sure if you want to just touch on that quickly before moving on to the other topics.
I think it's something that we discussed on stream at some point as well, but the way I see it is that the sea is already vast, and we know that we want to include, some new stuff, whether that be, a series of smaller islands or a big island and some smaller ones. I don't know what that looks like yet. But we want to include something new, right? And we want to also spruce up the existing ocean. So the question is then, with that big of an area, can we fill it entirely? In a reasonable time frame, so that we're not still here in 2030, working on the new skill. I don't want to be here working on sailing at that point, but I don't know about how the players feel. But regardless, we have to release it at some point, and so I would rather have limited areas that you can access, but really fulfilling areas that feel whole and entire, rather than something along the lines of what Karend was on release, when it was a vast area which looks impressive at first, but then you go there and there's actually nothing to do. So out of those, I would rather stick with the smaller, more restricted area, but just that feels alive.
Absolutely.
I'd like the whole sea to feel useful to an extent, even if it's just as a baseline, you find things at sea. You can probably find that all over the place, but in terms of core activities and really densely populated areas on the oceans, I can't imagine it being incredibly vastly spread. But it would leave room for future content and expansions if we didn't do that. I saw some people in the chat mentioning quests for expansions in the future. That would absolutely be possible. So again, I probably wouldn't want to fill the whole sea, because I'd want to leave room for expansion. That's my take.
Yeah, I mean, no skill's finished. That's, I think, a key thing. We still add new content to pretty much every skill in game when we have a chance. But we don't want to release something that feels unfinished, if you see the distinction, right? It shouldn't feel like it's half-assed. It should be a complete skill that still has room for new stuff to be added. Kind of what we want.
Agree. All right, with the interest of time, let's move into navigation. So this is the first topic that we'll be discussing now with players. We asked you guys if you had a preference on the style of navigation. There wasn't a clear preference on exactly what we should do. We noticed that there is a huge amount of support for point and click, and that makes sense, right? Because it's intuitive, it's what you're used to. And I did see feedback about potential hybrid options. So at present, we don't know exactly how navigation is going to work, and that's why we really want to bump that up and discuss that with you guys. Do you guys have any thoughts here on navigation? How you imagine it to work?
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
It's probably the most controversial topic, and it's probably one of the things that players are who are the most skeptical about sailing have problems with, right? People keep talking about, would this content not be awesome? Would this content not be awesome? But and it's easy to get behind these sort of very nitty-gritty ideas, but very few people can visualize how exactly am I controlling this ship. A lot of players have raised concerns about the tile-based system, potential limitations of that, from the size of the sea to I don't want it to feel like Bon Voyage. I think that navigation in general is something that is so important for us to really nail down and spend time working on, which we have been doing. So I'm excited to share stuff with players when we get to that point. But I think this is just a really important thing that players players just don't have a good handle on what this could be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially, as I said, a lot of the previous implementations haven't been done all that well.
I guess it's difficult for people to visualize it currently because they feel that they are already sailing in a way in game, because you do have boats, but as Elena mentioned previously, it's never the player sailing, it's someone else. You just kind of see that sort of like loading screen while you're sailing away to a different destination. So trying to visualize exactly how you as a player would navigate a ship and how many different options there could be is quite daunting. And I imagine that it's quite a difficult conversation to have when you don't have something to look at. Does anyone have any thoughts?
I think
wanna take
I have
player
plenty of
suggestion or
thoughts, but there's
question?
not too much I really want to dive into at this exact point in time.
I think
Yeah.
what I want to say is there's a reason we want to deal with navigation as the first thing that we get to when we really dig into refinement, because this is going to shape how you feel about the skill, how you envision stuff happening, like training loops and all that stuff. I think it's also super important to think about this is not just a skill, it's a way of moving around, like getting from A to B as well. So it's naturally something that you're going to be doing quite a lot. And if you think about existing skills, most of them take about like 100 plus hours to like get from 1 to 99. So if we imagine, and that's not to confirm that sailing will take this long, but if we imagine roughly 100 hours, if sailing is incredibly boring to do for that long, just like or incredibly difficult to do for that long, you're going to find it frustrating. So that's why I think at its core, it's really important that we get navigation right, so that it doesn't feel tedious to go for 100 hours to get from point A to B, to get to that new boss on an island, or get to that training method you want to go to, or even that PvP method that Skill Specs wants to do. You know, it shouldn't feel like a chore having to get somewhere, essentially.
Absolutely, and I did see some concerns from mobile players in the chat. We will make sure to keep that in mind. Like, we do not want it to feel clunky and annoying for you, especially on mobile. It's just, it wouldn't feel right as a skill, in my opinion, to release something that just simply doesn't work on mobile. So
A great point from Pyro Knight 27. Chat. I feel like navigation really requires more hands-on testing, speculation, and I think that's certainly entirely true. It's part of refinement. We're not going to get quite to that level, but certain down the line, we intend to be doing beta tests of various functionality for skill. So before the launch, the players will almost certainly get their hands on it, on certain aspects of it, and be able to give us that hands-on feedback. Because you're right, entirely right. We could go as far as we can with like kind of communication back and forth with blogs and so on at this point, but there's nothing like actually playtesting. I mean, in fact, we've got players in the office this week for playtesting Desert Treasure 2 bosses, right? Like, we do this sort of stuff regularly. It's valuable.
awesome. Do we want to take one player question on this topic before moving on to rewards quickly? We only have a few slides. There's not a lot more slides left, so I feel like we can squeeze one question in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Right, let's take one from a general contributor. This is our first general contributor we've got on. Hello, Morks Gaga, if you are still around. Hello, do you have a question for us on navigation?
Yeah, actually. Hi.
Hi.
Kieran just, I believe, if that's who was speaking, I wasn't watching. About whether you guys would be doing beta testing specifically just for the navigation, because I do think that it's extremely important to have the feel known, because even in just the general contributor chats, we've been talking about it, and it's so hard to really conceptualize what that feeling is. And so, yeah, I just wanted to see if that was something that you had already considered.
Yeah, so it's not like we're going to be able to do it before the poll, I don't think. But once it's greenlit, then yes, we would be looking to put up some beta tests.
With the polling approach, like the general idea is that we can allocate more resources, the more kind of player buy-in that we have. So in terms of these next few steps, like we don't want to put too much resource into getting a playable beta, which players have a really high expectation of what they expect from a beta, just to risk that potentially not passing because of the fact that then we basically allocated a huge amount of resource into making playable content for people that ultimately don't want the skill to pass. So we need to know that the skill is going to be something that players want in the game before that we can allocate that much resource to it. Having said that, though, we do recognize that navigation is basically a deal breaker for a lot of players. And we understand how important it is to get right, and there's lots of different options we can go with. So we're experimenting with different ways that we can get that feedback, especially visually, so that players have a really good understanding of what navigation is going to feel like before voting for it as a skill. Like, we definitely want people to feel informed on it. We definitely want people to understand exactly what they're voting for. But also we have to balance that against the interests of, like, we can't put all of our resource into developing something that ultimately isn't what the community want. So there's lots of just different considerations, and we'll take that on board. I have seen the general contributor chat. I have seen the discussions going on, and it is really, really difficult without something to kind of look at and give your opinions on. But I can say that we recognize like how players feel it needs to be intuitive and not clunky. Like, we've seen your feedback based on the interfaces that are currently used in some of the existing quests, which aren't that great because they're very, very old. That's not to say that we can never use interfaces, but it's just a case of like, we're very aware that this is like a deal breaker. Hopefully that was okay. Hopefully I didn't say anything wrong. I'm not sure if anyone wants to add anything before we move on to rewards.
Oh, thank you.
One thing I'd
answered my question. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. But one thing I would want to add is that while we can't commit to having all that work done for a beta test before Greenlight Ball, it is something that we absolutely heavily beta test throughout the development process. It is the biggest, most significant part of this skill is how that ship feels to navigate. It can't be too tedious because otherwise players are going to not enjoy doing it. But at the same time, if it's really boring and just like I'm not even caring about the fact that I'm sailing a ship and it feels awful, that's not good either. To the point that like the rest of the content surrounding sailing really does pale in significance to how important that is to get right. So if players are giving us feedback in beta test throughout development that it doesn't feel good or they want changes, that is going to be our highest priority to make sure that we get right and work with players to make something that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely forgot to mention that, like, even when you get to the stage of a beta, there's still like a bunch of feedback before it's released that you can action. So yeah. Mork, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. All right, I will move you to the audience. We only have a few minutes, so basically the last slide to talk about here. I've skipped over a few, but they weren't super spicy. They weren't really surprising, and there should be a follow-up blog that kind of explains everything in a bit more detail. But just looking at the reward space, as you can see, there's nothing really spicy here. Like, most of the rewards were pretty well received. The only one that people thought understandably wasn't as important was the cosmetic side of things, usually like the icing on the cake type of deal, which is understandable. But the most popular two were ship items and upgrades and meta progression, so a way to improve your ship and access new areas. Do we want to talk a little bit about what meta progression looks like at the moment? Even though we haven't really started on rewards, what are your initial thoughts?
So I kind of touched on meta progression a little bit when I talked about like racing through the ranks in different factions and that kind of stuff. But relating it to existing skills, what I would consider meta progression is like if you look at woodcutting, for example, leveling up and unlocking the ability to use a new type of axe would be considered, that kind of progression. So in sailing, naturally you'd probably have similar type of things where you unlock something that then later can unlock something else for you. With sailing specifically, I think it would make sense to kind of upgrade your ship. So for example, if there are shallows that you want to cross, maybe you can't do it with a certain type of ship. But if you get to upgrade the whole of the ship to be stronger, then maybe you can cross across the shallows. That's just one example. Like, I'm sure we'll come up with some more eventually, but...
Cool idea. Husky Cast, Kieran, did you want to add anything just generally about your thoughts on reward space? Nothing was really surprising to me, so just go wild if you want to for the last few minutes.
I'm just excited. There's so much good stuff there. There's so much potential. I love the meta progression stuff because I think it's a real opportunity to tie in some of the other skills as well. If you could upgrade your ship, for instance. But yeah, that's obviously, it just shows like all those, every single thing. There's a huge list of things, and whilst if we look at it as design, it's like, oh gosh, right, cosmetic stuff comes at the bottom. It's not very important. Well, it makes sense. Cosmetics aren't important, almost by design. It might not mean we don't do any cosmetic stuff. You might want something, but it's vital that we do include meaningful rewards. That's a key takeaway for sure.
Absolutely. It just depends on what you as a player find meaningful, I guess. But as long as you're progressing towards like number go up.
I mean, the skill should help you. As every skill in the game should, right? It should have a meaningful part of your character. You as an adventurer should feel better because you have 99 in this skill. A lot of the skills don't do a great job at the higher end. We definitely don't want to have that issue with sailing. We want to nail it.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking at some of the chat questions. Does anyone have any questions in chat?
There is no shot.
Will I be able to bring my GF on the
Yes, maybe. Who knows?
I just can't wait to upgrade my cannons and sync skill specs. It's gonna be great.
There's a lot of quite like detailed questions. I just want to reiterate, like, we don't have a lot of information at the moment. Like pretty much the next 2 months are dedicated in specific segments and categories to be thinking about this in more detail, getting designs together. We haven't like started on the formal designs of like the reward space. We just have like some ideas. We've got the survey results now. We've got the community feedback, and we're going to have that time allocated. I think it was like early June to talk about it and to think about it.
Yeah, so that's our next steps, really, right? Like, that's to give everyone a clear idea. We haven't started full designs about how specific things will work for the skill. The whole point of the pitching process was to say, here's a theme, a direction to go in, and then the surveys to get a bit of data for us to now reflect into what we're going to look to design now. So, like, we see a lot of questions like, how will this specific thing work in this hypothetical piece of content that may or may not be able, because that other piece of content is also probably dependent on passing the poll at 70%. The answer is we don't know, right? We are probably going to be taking things bit by bit. As we said, we're going to work on navigation and core gameplay, the things that will really help it feel like a substantial skill. And then reward space is the really exciting thing a lot of players hyper focus on now. Like, ooh, what about this reward? And what if this reward worked this way? And it's really easy to get excited about the reward space of sailing because of the limitless potential. We're really excited about that too. It's just, we're going to have to take that really slowly, and it's hard to answer specific questions about specific things that may or may not be pitched as content for the skill. But that doesn't mean that players can't keep suggesting things either, right? We love seeing ideas for things that people could do at sea. And I think just seeing those ideas circulated around the community, see which ones come up to the top, see which ones players really want to see over others. Yeah, keep that coming, because that will be very relevant at some point during this. Yeah.
I do feel like we're in an interesting situation because out of all 3 skills that we did pitch, the sailing reward space was the most, I feel, tempered, but at the same time has the most potential in terms of what it could bring you. Like, what could the islands give you? What could upgrading your ship do for you as a character? Like, on the surface, a lot of players seem to believe that the reward space is literally just, oh, I get to sail to different areas. Like, I already have teleports for that. But in reality, like, what we could do with sailing is, like, there's so much potential. There's such a huge ceiling with that as a reward space. So it's going to be interesting to see, like, how far players want us to go with reward space. Like, do they prefer it to be tempered and have, like, less of an impact on the wider game, or do they want, like, more potential for power creep? Like, what are they going to decide? I'm not sure yet at this point. Do we want a player question potentially, just to round things off? Everyone's been pretty nice so far. Raise your hand, guys, if you have a question about reward space for the dev team. This will be the last question that we go with, because we will be finishing up soon. Let's go with a general contributor. I think I added you today because you were testing out the server with me. Dratch. Hello, Dratch. What's your question?
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hey.
So, when it comes to sailing, I've seen sort of two kind of camps for the reward space. A lot of people see it, say, like dungeoneering, where it sort of feeds into itself quite a lot, but there's not a lot of external reward. I'm wondering if the team has any hesitations or worries about it just being coming back to the minigame sentiment of, is sailing going to affect the kind of the entire game and the entire economy, or is it going to be more self-contained?
I guess there's two sides to it. One is, how does the game impact sailing, and how does sailing impact the game, right? So you could have skills that help you with stuff in sailing. For example, I was talking about upgrading the whole of your ship earlier. What if part of the ship, or part of one of the upgrades, required a bit of construction or a bit of crafting, or, you know, some other skills that integrate into that? That is a good way to make it feel more grounded into the game. But you compared it to dungeoneering, and that's what dungeoneering did really well, is that they did use those other skills. But the problem was they didn't do it the other way. Like, dungeoneering on release wasn't really a requirement for anything, and it wasn't really accessed from multiple places. It didn't, you know, change the world around you, other than the rewards you could just buy in the shop, right? I know they later fixed that, but those were the main issues. And so the way I see it is, sailing needs to impact the world in some ways, not just through the rewards, but just like the integration of the content as well. And one way to do that, that we kind of talked about in the survey as well, is looking at the existing ports in the game. Like, can we utilize those to change those up a bit, to have those be like the place that you go to start off training sailing, right? And that's your access point to the sea. That could be one thing. Another thing is, like, say that we wanted to go with like a crew system, for example, where you have to recruit people around the world to come onto your ship. Now, we could lock that behind quests. We could say that you have to complete Demon Slayer to be able to recruit one of the people in Varrock, or you need to complete this other quest to recruit someone else. And so that way, you kind of tie sailing a little bit back into the world, but I think down the line, it just also kind of happens very naturally by being a requirement for new quests and stuff. It's quite hard to fit it in retroactively, but I think it needs doing to some extent. There's also the danger of doing it too much, where it feels like it's taking over the game, and it can't do that either. So it's a difficult balance to strike, but one that I think that we need to pay some thought to.
If I may add, you touched on, it might touch on too many things. There's definitely been some discussion in the chat here about sailing being like a RuneScape 3 elite skill. Now, I haven't played RuneScape 3, but from what I can surmise, I think that's something that we would also like to avoid.
Yes, so my understanding, and correct me in chat if I'm wrong, an elite skill is where you need certain skills to be able to train it at all.
Yeah, you need level 80 and multiple skills to be able to train an elite skill, I'm pretty sure, in RS3.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's
Front bench.
probably something we'd like to avoid. I think we haven't had any like hard requirements set yet, but my gut instinct is to just say that there's no requirements. You can just go train sailing. It might not be the best way to do it. It might be better if you have other skills that could help you, but I also don't see why we would want to gate it at any point. Right.
I want to
Okay,
see
cool.
the account that's what level 1 every skill except 10 hit points and 99 sailing. I want to see that Chad who only lives at the sea and only does sailing content, you know?
See
Me
men
too.
mode.
Oh god.
And at the very least, like, yeah, you're right. Like, we need to have some aspects of the skill that might require, like, your other skills would help in, right? It's kind of that weird, like, where do you draw the line? I think you covered a lot earlier. I think it's good when there's a lot of cross, like, things behind skill. You can only, like, this upgrade to your ship requires you to have a high level in this other skill, or to have this resource that you can only gain if you're a high level in other skill, or some combination of that. But it's so wishy-washy, up in the air, maybe what ifs. We'd like best we can. We'll probably fall to players how to integrate them, and really do our best to avoid the idea that you are like in Daemonheim, where you're just locked to this dungeon and you're not part of the world, right? Which is, to me, that is why that skill felt very much like a mini game. We want you to get resources from sailing that you can then like use in other parts of the game, and vice versa.
Yeah. Who knows what fish or what types of wood or whatever, right? You're gonna find out in the ocean, because it's easy to thematically come up with a load of things that we could easily tie into other skills. Like, could simply be new creatures you can hunt, new items that help you with existing hunting. We could also utilize resource skills to some degree, perhaps, as well. Like, maybe they're new resources, but often the interaction point between a skill and another skill is a tradable resource, right? Like, you don't have to chop your own logs to go and light them. You can buy them. In that, you can get 99 fire making without training woodcutting. But obviously, it is quite kind of handy if you can train your woodcutting as well. So that, on probably a little bit more of a complex level, I'm imagining it could do that. So I see it as being quite well integrated, and not at all like dungeoneering, where it's self-serving.
Awesome.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks for the question.
Yeah,
I
great
really
question.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
I feel like we could wrap up now because we've overran by a little bit. Does anybody have any closing thoughts, or just want to address, like, talk to chat for any questions? Speak now or forever
I mean, we
hold
could
your
sit here
peace.
talking to chat all day, weeks, months.
I know, it's super fun. It's really cozy. I really love the vibe. Everyone's been super polite, so thank you so much to our wonderful community for, like, not saying anything rude on this first time that we test voice permissions. We really appreciate it. We obviously skimmed a lot of that data. Like, this isn't the only data that we've been looking at. We've also been looking at some of the feedback directly in Discord. We're still going through the free text responses, but just to reiterate, the plan is, if you check out the latest refinement blog, the plan is basically to talk about all of these 4 topics in a lot more detail once we have a bit more detail to share with you on our thoughts. We will post a blog live and then get your feedback on it, and potentially update the blog. We're not sure, based on that feedback, with a view to then getting a more detailed design blog sometime, potentially in early July. We'll see how it goes. There is a lot to talk about, so we really, really appreciate the fact that you guys are engaging with us, sending in your feedback, and pretty much helping us to shape the skill. And remember that the skill is basically shaped on your feedback. So if you don't like a specific part of the skill, or a specific part of the design, we are more than happy to like review that feedback and change things within reason. So make sure to just keep letting us know how you feel about it. Thank you to our wonderful JMod team for joining us. Kieran, Curse, Elena, Husky, really, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You're more than
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome.
Touching on your last point there, I really do hope that players out with the dog and he just jumped, ran to the other end, pulled my arm off. But yeah, I really hope the players sort of respond well to the fact we're doing things differently here. We're very much trying to say we're not going to go into a closet and 3 months designing an entire skill only for like 2 or 3 weak links in it to fall apart. We really do want to take it piece by piece, 2 weeks per subject. Like, it is such a different process than we normally go, where it's just one survey, then we go away and hide away and design something that matches that. So yeah, I'm interested to see how that goes, how the very piecemeal building it up with the community along the way goes, and I hope everyone's here for it.
Awesome. Great speech. Yeah, I really do want us to unite around sailing at this point. Like, there's so much potential. So for the next few months, we'll be working really, really hard to get everyone on board. No pun intended. Cool. Thank you so much, guys. I will end the stages call now. If I can figure out how to do it. I'll leave the chat open for a little bit, but then close it based on what we can manage and maintain. You can expect more stages discussions pretty much at a regular cadence. Like, we'll do them as often as we can, but obviously we need to make sure that they're still valuable, right? Like, you probably don't want to listen to just us talking smack every single week.
I wouldn't put it
So,
past them,
I
to
was
be
going to
honest.
say I wouldn't say it like that.
Well, let us know if you do want us to join just for a week where it's really quiet, talk about what we had for lunch that day. We're more than happy to do that, or at least I would be. I can't speak for Kieran, Kaz, Selena, and Husky, but yeah. Thank you so much. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Hey everyone, Modlight here. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. And make sure that you're in the new skill Discord. We're going to have our next stages chat on May the 12th. It's a great opportunity to ask your questions directly to the dev team and potentially get your questions answered. So we'll see you there.